Okay. Yeah. Okay. Hello, my name is Allison Mize. I'm Director of Public Affairs with ESA. And Maida, would you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everybody. Maida Nathan, Public Affairs Manager with ESA.
Great. And as I mentioned, this will be, hold on. And the one person who should have silenced their cell phone was me, and I did not, so apologies to you. Anyway, so this presentation is being recorded and it will be it will be shared with you, and you'll have full access to all the materials that you see today. So don't worry about taking notes. Okay, next slide. Okay, who are we? We're Maida and I are the two staff people in the Public Affairs Office with ESA. We handle all the outward-facing media, and that means press and press for our journals also, and our policy within ESA. We have many members who volunteer and help us really exponentially increase our impact in policy. We have something called a rapid response team, which is composed of subject matter experts who Maida and I interact with whenever we get a media request. We'll find a subject matter expert within the rapid response team, and we will share that person's name with the reporter. And then additionally, whenever we have a piece of legislation or there's a science related question within the federal government that deals specifically with the science of ecology, we reach out to members of the rapid response team to tell us if it's good science or bad science. We will be opening a call for additional rapid response team members shortly. So please go ahead and join. We will give you training. And if you don't think you're a subject matter expert quite yet, we can still find a use for you within ESA. So look for that. Next slide. Okay, other opportunities within ESA. We are here to support you, our members. And I think we do have people on the webinar who are not members, and we really encourage you to join ESA. If not, right now we are one of the binding organizations for the science of ecology, and ESA is a place where you can get your papers published. You can come to our annual meeting. But additionally, we can provide the glue for you throughout your career, and in difficult times like this, support for you. So please do consider joining ESA if you are not. If you have not renewed your membership this year, please go ahead and renew your membership. You can additionally, once you're a member, join our policy section. It's quite active. Join the communication engagement section, serve on the rapid response team. Maida and I, if you ever came to DC, or even if you didn't come to DC, we'd be happy to coordinate Hill visits for you. We have a policy toolkit online, which Maida and I are furiously updating daily, I think, to give you more resources. We follow the federal government budget. We have something called the Graduate Student Policy Award, where we bring students into DC and basically do a policy boot camp, and then we take them up on the Hill. And additionally, you can serve in leadership positions, either in a committee or a section. It's especially good for students and postdocs because you're honing your leadership skills and you're building your reputation within the ecological community. You've got our email addresses, so please use them. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to try and get you, show you how to get up to speed with what's going on in Congress. There are two publications, one called The Hill and one called Roll Call, which covers all things Congress. They have free newsletters, so I would go to both of those sites and sign up. Additionally, everyone has a congressional delegation on the Hill. You have someone who represents you in the House, and you have two senators. They all have newsletters. Please sign up for them, and you can find out what's important to your legislature, and also it'll give you more impact when you meet with that particular member of Congress. Ditto for your local and state lawmakers. Just go to their websites, find out what they send out, and register. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to do a quick review of congressional culture, how Congress works. We're going to do brief message development. Um, Maida and I are going to schedule a post-webinar 1 hour workshop only for those who signed up for this webinar, where we will spend an hour with you and actually develop your message and hone your message. And we'll probably get into breakout groups and we can give you one-on-one attention in terms of preparing your message. There's just not enough time to do that in an hour and 15 minutes. So I hope you will sign up and utilize that as a resource. So we're going to tell you how to engage, what to expect, and to follow up and give you a few inside tips. So next slide. Okay, quickly, federal policy, checks and balances. There are three branches of the U.S. government. The legislative branch, it makes the laws. The executive branch carries out the laws through the federal agencies. And then the judicial branch evaluates the laws. And there are layers to each one of those branches of government, but they serve really as checks and balances against each other. So next slide. Again, opportunities for policy engagement are at the federal, state, and local level. Please advocate, speak up, get involved at all levels. And I'll tell you another reason why it's super important to especially get involved at the state level and the local level. So governors of states have a unique role. When you contact your governor or your state legislature, we have 50 governors and then we have 4 territories. But the governors have the more pressure governors get from their constituents in that particular state, the more likely that governor is to voice whatever their concerns are to the administration, but also to members of Congress. So you really want to influence the influencers to reach Congress, and those are it works its way up local, state, and federal. So please remember that when you're speaking up for the science of ecology. Next slide. Safeguards and boundaries. Okay, so you clearly want to state that you're speaking as a citizen, not on behalf of your organization or institution. ESA is a nonprofit, which means we don't pay taxes. And we have very special rules that apply to the amount of actual lobbying we can do. And not all interactions with lawmakers are lobbying, but it's too technical for me to get into right now. So you always just want to err on the side of caution and just clearly say that you're speaking for yourself, not for your workplace or not for ESA, unless you have permission. Okay, communicate on your own time, especially uh, communicate on your own time, not on your company time. Use your own computer, use your own phone. Contact them outside of the office, outside of the university when you're at home. And this is actually illegal. Never use federal award money for advocacy. Never take a grant, say from NSF, and take money from that grant, fly to DC and meet with your lawmaker, or take money, put gas in your car and drive up and meet with your state legislator. That is illegal. You will get in trouble for it. And not only will you lose your award, it has other repercussions. So you just very clearly want to stay in your lane on this. Whenever you have any questions or you're in doubt, you can contact Mater or myself. We'd be happy to talk it through with you. Additionally, you can talk to your government relations office. Every university, every college has somebody who handles federal government relations because most universities and colleges receive significant federal funding. And so those are resources for you. Please use them. And then you can, meet away. But until then, make sure that you're doing the right thing, staying within the guardrails. Next slide. Okay, does it matter? So 11% of constituents think that it doesn't matter. However, if you talk to, and these are surveys, members of Congress, staying in touch with constituents is 95% said it's hugely important. And I will tell you, when you go meet with members of Congress, they don't have national newspapers in their office usually. They might, but they're going to have the local newspapers. They all look at the local newspapers, the state newspaper, or particularly in the district, just your local newspaper. So don't underestimate the influence that you could have with your member of Congress. Next slide. Okay, Maida, do you want to go over congressional culture quickly?
Thing. So this is probably material that is familiar to most, if not all of you, but just to make sure we're all on the same page here. The House of Representatives and Senate are the two legislative bodies. The House has 435 members representing 435 districts. The Senate, there are 100 members, 2 from each state. The House is much more active. It's by majority vote, so they need a simple majority to pass bills. That's not the case in the Senate, which tends to be much more deliberative. The filibuster exists in the Senate, which essentially means that any bill needs at least 60 votes in order to pass. The House has been under Republican control since 2023. The Senate, as of the last election, is now also Republican controlled. Members of the House are up for re-election every 2 years, so they're always essentially running for re-election, whereas members of the Senate have 6-year terms. They can afford to relax from the election cycle a little bit more, and again, be a little bit more deliberative about legislation. In the House, since individual members of the House represent individual districts, they have much narrower constituencies, whereas in the Senate, senators are representing members of an entire state. So power in the Senate is more equally distributed among senators, whereas power in the House, there's a bit more structure there, and there's less even distribution of power. Anything you'd like to add, Allison, before moving on?
Okay, and there's a website, congress.gov, and that has everything that you ever wanted to know about Congress on it. You can find your member of Congress there. It has lesson plans for teachers. It gives you the schedule, the floor schedule when Congress is in session, and it also gives you the hearings. If you ever wanted to watch a committee hearing, this is where you can find out about it. It has all the information on all the bills that are introduced, and the status of those bills in Congress. And I'd also just like to point you, there's something called the Library of Congress reports. They're called CRC reports. And any member of Congress can request a report on any topic. And that's kind of like the think tank for Congress, and it's the Library of Congress. But those are really good reports. And so they write their reports on just about any topic that you can think of, and it's an underutilized resource. So it's kind of, if you ever have an hour or so, just look through the CRS, look at the CRS website and see if there are any reports there that interest you. You can get a lot of really good information that's very well written. It's all sourced. And it's pretty objective. It's not partisan. So next slide. Okay, for the 119th, Maida went over the culture. We have razor sharp margins in each house. The Senate, again, Maida said there's a filibuster, unless they can do away with the filibuster if they want to vote on something, but they're very reticent to do so for many reasons. But as you can see, there's a pretty close margin in the Senate, and if they need 60 votes to pass a bill, they have to reach across the aisle and compromise. The House is even closer, 218 Republicans, 215 Democrats, 2 vacancies, and things pass by a simple majority. But all it takes is, one Republican, um, dropping away to lose that majority. So anyway, so super close margins, which means if people vote across party lines, it will go one way, but you get just a few members crossing the aisle, and a piece of legislation can go a very different way. So next slide. Okay. And so this Congress, um, 26, and then the Pew does a great job, and this is all publicly available on the website. But the Pew Charitable Trust does a great job in terms of surveying Congress. Who are these members? Uh, 26% are Black, Hispanic, Asian, or Native American. Women, 28%. I know it's still shocking on both of those statistics, but that's what it is. LGBTQ or even less. But we do have our first openly trans member in Congress. Millennial and Gen Zs, 13.5%. So that's really growing. That's a really powerful demographic. 87% Christian. And then education stats. Not many members of Congress have science degrees. We do have a few. Bill Foster's a physicist. The others that have science degrees are mainly medical degrees. A jurisprudence, which is when you get your law degree, that's actually a doctorate, but we don't factor that in. But anyway, but as you can see, 6% do not have college degrees, and that's kind of shocking in itself. So that's what it is. So next slide. Okay, laws. And this is the 117th Congress. We're in the 119th Congress. Um, Congress is every 2 years because of the House. Every time the House has an election, we have a new Congress. But 16,000, 17,000 were introduced in the 117th, and 2% became law. Bills don't carry over from one session to the next because the House is every 2 years. You don't want to pass a piece of legislation that came from the last Congress, representation from constituents elect every 2 years, and they want those constituents to represent them. Bills can be reintroduced though, but in any given administration, and we have a lot of data on this, or a lot of information on this. It's very rare for a major piece of legislation to get passed, and each Congress has between, say, 6 and 12 pieces of major legislation that gets passed. And the larger number, the 10 plus pieces of legislation, are when the House, the Congress, and the administration are all of the same party. But even then, it's an extremely low percentage. So next slide. Okay, partisan gridlock. People are really looking at things through their own ideology. Legislation moves super slow, except when it's extremely urgent, such as the COVID legislation. Next slide. Okay, committees. That's where everything happens in both the House and the Senate. Of those 17,000 bills I talked about in the 117th Congress, each one of those bills gets assigned to a committee. The majority party, which in this case is the Republican Party in both houses, both chambers of Congress, they have total control over those committees. What gets considered in the committees. If there's a hearing, they get to call a hearing. The minority party, which in this case is a Democratic Party, does not get to call hearings, does not get to say which, if the committee's going to consider a piece of legislation. And the chairs have great power on the committee. So when you look up your member of Congress, look at their committees, see which committee they're on, and if they are a chair or the ranking member, those are very powerful positions, and you have a greater influence than if your member of Congress was not on that committee. And most things die in committee. They say, most bills die in committee. That's just pretty typical. Committees have oversight power, which means they have oversight over all the federal agencies. And in the Senate, they have confirmation power for federal judges and also the high-level administration appointees. I think you've probably been hearing a lot about the confirmation hearings. And also the Senate has to vote on Supreme Court justice nominations. Next slide. Okay, so Maida, do you want to go over this a little bit more? And we've talked a little bit about the committee, so.
Sure thing. So as you're gearing up to approach a legislator, just as with any engagement opportunity, you want to know your audience. And one of the first places that you should go to is that member of Congress's website. We'll go through in a few minutes what that actually will look like. But you should be able to find, for example, what committees they serve on. If you don't see it there, you can go back to congress.gov, the website Allison mentioned a few minutes ago. But that will give you a pretty good impression of the power that they do have. You can find issues that that are important to them or their constituents. You can see if they're members of a caucus. Caucuses are kind of affiliation groups, primarily in the House, and they're organized around shared interests. So there are lots of silly caucuses like the Candy Caucus or the Pickleball Caucus, but there are some very powerful caucuses. You may have heard of the Congressional Black Caucus or of the Freedom Caucus. So these are other, this can be additional evidence of a member of Congress's interests, as well as places where they may have some leverage in Congress. Other places you can go to for information about a member of Congress are committee websites where you can see legislation that is being considered. You can see, of course, who serves on the committees. You can see member of Congress's legislative history, both at congress.gov, the website that now we've mentioned a few times, and govtrack.us. That's another really great resource for digging into members' voting records. Social media, of course. If you want to know what people are talking about right now, that's a great place to go. Twitter, X, Blue Sky, what have you. All members of Congress have pretty active social media presences. And then finally on this list, you see your university's government relations office. So these are folks who have already reached out to local, regional, national policymakers. So they may have some helpful tips for you. They may have some helpful talking points about your university's, funding status, about grants received, that kind of thing. And they will probably also have some very helpful guardrails and guidelines to help you stay well within the boundaries of the law to make sure you're doing everything according to the rules.
Thank you. Next slide. And this is just a example of a website. This is Senator Duckworth from Illinois, and you can find out a lot of just about anything you want to from their websites, and you can see the newsletter sign up on the upper right-hand corner. Next slide. And so we can just go to committee assignments. Next slide. And you can see that these are the issues that she cares about, and we're highlighting environment, energy, and Great Lakes. So these are her core issues. But as you can see, she talks about environment, energy, and Great Lakes in great detail. So say if you're studying invasive species, that's something that you want to let that office know. You could potentially serve as a subject matter expert, but obviously, Senator Duckworth is very concerned about science, even if science isn't her core issue. She needs the science in order to be able to manage policy for the Great Lakes. Next slide. Okay, so your meetings. You're primarily going to be meeting with congressional staff. They're the real decision makers. And these are some older pictures, but you can see Speaker Pelosi, and those are her staff, and they actually follow the member of Congress. It's like a gaggle of geese. They just follow her around. But they're young and they're smart. And then on the right, we have former Speaker McCarthy before he lost his speakership. Those were his staffers. So yeah, so we need more diversity on the Hill. And even though times are tough right now, if you've ever considered interning on the Hill or working for a member of Congress, even briefly, it's a great way to get some really valuable experience and really it's a crash course in all things policy. Next slide. Okay, and so again, staffers. So you've got 435 members in the House, There's 7,000 staffers. That tells you who does the work. There's a lot going on. They need that much staff. Then in the Senate, less senators, 100, but they have larger offices, and you can see they have less staffers. But next slide. Okay, typical staffers in the House, mid-20s, little science background, uh, uh, work incredibly hard, smart people, but and they don't get paid much. But they have a diverse issue portfolio, and that's what people call their issues, what's in your portfolio. And their portfolio may be as wide as healthcare, recreation, and science, and just these huge issues. The staffers are probably not don't have science backgrounds, but they're very interested in what you have to say, especially if it's applicable to an issue that their boss cares about, their member of Congress. Senate staffers, because the terms in the Senate are 6 years, they're usually older, less transient, have more focused portfolios. They work long hours, but you're more likely to find people who have PhDs in the Senate than in the House. Yeah, anyway. And then additionally, if the committees have their own staff, and we'll go back to Senator Duckworth, but a committee that she is on, a staffer on that committee will take your meeting, especially if you're a constituent of a member on that committee. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to talk about messaging. But before we do that, I do want to just take just a quick minute and say that when you meet with your member of Congress, especially when things are so volatile right now and things are so emotional, for lack of a better word, it is so important that you are polite, and that you speak very respectfully to that staffer or that member of Congress, for two reasons. Number one, if you don't, they're not going to listen to what you have to say. They just won't. But then, as scientists, you have a unique subject matter expertise, and there are not that many of you compared to the general population. And so the knowledge that you have could potentially be very valuable to that member of Congress. So you really want to work on presenting yourself as a reliable, credible source of information, but also as a constituent who will speak with, treat them with respect, the respect of the office, if nothing else. And that's super important. And I will tell you that everything that you see, CNN on TV and all the vitriol back and forth and the floor statements where there's nobody in the chamber of Congress, they're talking to an empty room, which means they're talking to the television. That may be part of the reality, but the reality is that when you are on the Hill, particularly, um, people act like normal human beings in that they're polite to each other. They may not agree with each other, but they do listen to each other. So I don't want you to think that you'll be walking into like a CNN, screaming match when you're on the Hill. That's not the way it works in my experience. Sometimes maybe, but it's not going to be in a meeting with an ecologist. That's not going to happen. Out of the hundreds and hundreds of meetings that I've had on the Hill, um, I think I've had maybe two meetings that weren't cordial, and the rest were a bipartisan meeting with Republicans, Democrats, all different issues, have been very respectful. So just keep that in mind, and hopefully that will give you confidence and faith, more faith that what you have to say does matter. So, but when you meet with that member of Congress or their staffer, you're going to want to have your goal in mind. And it could be to educate the office about a certain issue. You could talk about the impacts of the cuts in federal funding. It could be to advocate for an issue or discuss a specific piece of legislation. And these are examples. Next slide. Okay, and you want to know again who you're representing. Most of the time, you're going to be a constituent scientist, a private citizen. So you could be representing your discipline, your research project, your institution, serving as a technical expert to inform policy positions, or just a concerned and informed citizen. Just one word about representing your research project. You cannot take federal dollars from a grant you get and spend that to, again, fly to DC, meet with your member of Congress. That's illegal. But it is perfectly legitimate to go up as a constituent scientist on your own time, using your own money to get there, and share your research project with them and tell them you do get federal funding for that research. That's important information. That is not against the rules. So just feel confident that you can go talk about your research with your member of Congress. That is well within the guidelines and rules. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to talk about message development here, and we don't have a lot of time. But again, Maida and I are going to we're going to hold a workshop, an hour-long messaging workshop for you later this week, and you'll be getting information on that. But as a researcher, you can see the
Allison, do
triangle
you
on
mind
the.
if we pause for 1 second? There's just a question in the Q&A that is
Sure,
relevant to what you were speaking
sure.
about a
Go
moment
ahead.
ago.
Sure.
Someone asks, what's a ranking member of a committee and why is that important?
Okay, so the majority party, in this case, for both the Senate and the House, are Republicans. The committee chairs of all the committees are Republicans because they are the majority party in both houses. The ranking member in the House and the Senate for all the committees goes with the minority party, in this case, the Democrats. So the chair of all committees are the majority party, and the ranking member, which is kind of the head person of the minority party on that particular issue, and they have seniority. It's still a very powerful position. That they're called the ranking member. So apologies, that's Hill jargon. I should have explained that a little bit better. So you have the chair, which goes with the majority party, and then the ranking member is the top person on the committee from the minority party, in this case, the Democrats. Thanks. Okay. So when you get to your message development, you see the inverted triangle on the left. As a researcher, you're going to want to talk about background, supporting details, and then give your results and conclusions. But for the rest of the world, and particularly for Congress, you want to flip that triangle or that pyramid. You want to get to the bottom line first, tell them why it's important, why they should care, and then give the supporting details. You're going to want to use as little jargon as possible, and ranking member was a great example of that. Someone didn't understand because I was using jargon. Sorry about that. And you want to use analogies and anecdotes to illustrate your point. And so those are like your personal stories. That's when you really do want to talk about your research and why it's important, say, to Tammy Duckworth, if you just study invasive species in the Great Lakes or even another place. So get to the point and then fill in with the background. Okay, next slide. Okay, and a message. Okay, what's the difference between a message and an ask? A message is an overarching theme or a unifying statement, and the ask is a specific call to action. Next slide. Okay, and staff expect you to make a request and ask, and I guess ask could be considered um, jargon on the Hill, but we hear over and over and over again from staff. If you don't ask them to do something, they don't know what to do with you. They will sit there, they will be polite to you, they will nod your head, and then they will forget you the minute you walk out the door. They don't know what to do if you don't ask them to do something. The majority of the time, unless you're educating them or serving as a technical expert or, talking about a certain issue. And even then, sometimes it's important to educate them or help them learn about a certain issue. But the majority of people meet with their member of Congress to ask them to either vote a certain way on a piece of legislation or to provide federal funding for a program or something like that. It's perfectly legitimate. It sounds weird, but that's the way it is. Okay, next slide. Okay, here's an example of a goal and ask a message. And this is a Florida graduate student who wants additional funding for NSF to do research. And so the ask would be this appropriation cycle. We ask you to support funding for the National Science Foundation at 11.9 billion to support important programs like fellowships, research, experiences for undergraduates, and more. And the message, and that's the personal story. Say this particular student is supported by an NSF grant, and so that student could say that, I wouldn't be able to pursue my doctorate without NSF support. And if they're from Florida, they study, wetlands or mangroves that are critical habitat for migrating birds. And then additionally, talk about the impact of universities within the state of Florida. Every state, doesn't matter if it's Republican or Democrat, has a scientific enterprise. And think about Alabama. Alabama is a very, very conservative Republican state, but they have Huntsville, they have NASA there. And because they also have a coast, there are the plethora of research laboratories on the coast. And so states that you wouldn't think have a deep respect or interest in science, you don't know until you actually start looking at what is the scientific enterprise within that state and why should that particular member of Congress care. And science hopefully is nonpartisan most of the time. So just dig a little deeper. Even if don't rely on the surface. Dig a little deeper about why science is so important to that particular legislator. Next slide. Okay, so when you craft your ask, again, you want to talk about how your work impacts the state or the district. You want to tell your story. And you also want to look at what are your legislature's values? It's like, what do they care about? And if you're talking values, we're going to go over words in a minute, but they're not talking about numbers. They're talking about what their beliefs are and what their values are. Next slide. Okay, so you might want to bring some fact sheets to support your ask. And here are two that are relatively available to you. So if you did want to go up and meet with your member of Congress and talk about the National Science Foundation funding for research. The National Science Board has a fact sheet for every state that talks about how much money that NSF gives to each state receives in terms of funding from NSF. And it just has other really good facts about workforce development and so on and so on. And these are publicly available on the NSF website. And then additionally, ESA, we keep this, this is the fact sheet that we use to go up on the Hill and advocate for NSF. And it specifically talks about the value of ecological and biological research, and it gives examples of the impact of both of this research for the nation. And so we have not had this posted on the website, but we are going to post this on the website. And under the policy toolkit or on one of the policy pages, we will put links to both of these, a link to the NSF site fact sheet page, and then they have other fact sheets too on the NSB, the National Science Board website. But you will have access to use the biological and ecological sciences worksheet. So next slide. Okay, and so in terms, scientific terms, simple language, and we talked a little bit about jargon, but if you think about bias, the bias is not, use the word range. Rather than say positive feedback, say vicious cycle. If you say positive feedback to a member of Congress or their staffer, they're going to think that's a good thing. When you talk about values, that's going to mean to you, it means a number, but to that member of Congress or their staffer, it's going to be about beliefs and so on and so on. So you really want to keep your language as simple as possible because, again, remember, most Hill staffers do not have a scientific background, nor do the members of Congress. So, next slide. Okay, and this is something we're not going to go over today, but this is kind of a fun exercise. We're going to use this when we do the workshopping later this week. But this is a program that only uses the most used 1,000 word language words in the English language. And so it's an oversimplification. But once you get your message worked out, we encourage people to put it into the UpGoer 5 text editor and just to see if how you're describing your message. You may think it's simple language, but it may not be one of the 1,000 most used words in the English language. So it's really about honing down your message and making it as simple and easily understandable as possible. And we do that not because it's easy for the person who's hearing it. We do that so the importance of what you're saying will be understood. Um, it's super important. Okay, next slide. Okay, so your message. Again, you want to think about your meetings. They're going to be short. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But your message needs to be miniature, memorable, and meaningful. You know, a couple of sentences. Next slide. It can be 3 focuses of your research, 3 reasons your work is important, 3 research questions you pursued, 3 results you found, or 3 potential applications. Next slide. And so when we do this workshop in person, this is where we stop and we ask you to write your 3 M's, do a short intro, and then 3 words that describe your research. And so why don't we just take, we have just a couple of minutes, but just go ahead and pick one. Don't do all 3, but just pick one of the points. Next slide, madam. I'm sorry. Yeah. So just pick one point and go ahead and write that down, or you can just think about it on your worksheet. Okay, Maida, next slide. Okay. And so how to engage? So you can call your member of Congress office, you can email them. Um, it can be in DC, your state, local office. It can be in person or it can be virtual. And I will tell you that every member of Congress has either a state or district office, and each state is your congressional district, whatever that is. They will have an office in the district, not just on the Hill. And so you don't have to come to DC to meet in person with your congressional office. The Senate offices will have multiple state offices throughout the state. They won't have one in every district, but they should have at the minimum of 2 state Senate offices. So you could potentially, drive an hour or so and go meet with your senator's office. During COVID, all meetings were done over Zoom. And so we at ESA developed a roadmap, basically how to have a virtual meeting that we used. And we are going to post that on our website. So if you wanted to meet with your lawmaker virtually, this is a step-by-step roadmap that tells you exactly how to do that. And then we haven't talked about this a lot, but we encourage people, um, if you're going to make a phone call, of course, you want to, you're going to be by yourself. Um, but if you're going to go meet in person with your member of Congress, it's always a good idea to find one or two colleagues who have a similar request to that member of Congress, and you can go together. You can go for moral support, but also too, it helps amplify the impact of your message in the meeting. So, okay, next slide.
Allison, I'll jump in here with another
Sure.
relevant question that's come through the Q&A. Someone asks, if we can't meet in person with our representatives, is there a consensus on whether emails or calls are more effective to communicate and ask?
You could do either. I would do both. Do both. You know, but keep it short in the email. Um, they're overwhelmed, they're super busy, but you after this webinar is over, you could call your member of I was talking to staffers last week and they will answer your call. There's always someone to answer the phone. Um, I don't think I've ever gotten a voicemail. I guess there's always a first time, but yeah, but identify yourself. And I will also tell you this that well, it depends on the office, but uh, if you were, say, lived in California and you wanted to meet with Mitch McConnell's office, they may not take your meeting. You're not a constituent. So they may just say, nope, not going to do it. And and that's, we've had that happen before, especially if the person, the member of Congress they're trying to meet with is a powerful member of Congress, say chair of the Appropriations Committee or chair of the Budget Committee. Like right now, that's Lindsey Graham, is chair of the Budget Committee in the Senate. And they just may say, I'm sorry, we don't have time to meet with you, and they won't do it. So you can try, but they're likely to ask you what your address is, and they want to know your address because they really want to find out if you're a constituent. So don't think that's weird if they ask that for you. So I would do both. I would also tell you that all those grassroots email, people send out, say, please contact your member of Congress. They do not check those email boxes. They can't because if they get a million emails, those go through a system and somehow they may see the aggregate number, which has impact. I'm not saying it doesn't, but they don't read every single one of those emails. They can't. But if you find out that but if you send a email, um, usually it's through their website, um, they will look at it. And yep. And then Maida and I will talk about how that gets reported up to the member of Congress. Okay, next slide. Okay, so do you want to go over the first couple of points, Maida, and then I'll talk a little bit about the others?
Sure thing. So clearly this is for meetings that are in person or maybe a video call. You want to dress appropriately, dress respectfully. These are going to be really short meetings, so be cognizant of the staffer's time that you're speaking with. After introductions, you want to thank them for meeting with you. Again, be courteous, be polite, explain clearly why you requested for the meeting. Make your ask, make it very clear what your ask is. Go through your 3 M's, share your story, share any local impacts you have. Always finish with a thank you. And maybe we should say this up front, but go in with a group plan. If you are going with a group, as Allison suggested a minute ago, make sure you have a plan for who is going to speak when, and if there are important points you're going to make, who's going to bring those up. And then follow up, always write a thank you note. That always reflects well on you and it reflects well on the organization you're representing if you're there as a representative.
Yeah. And I will just say that we have examples of how to write a letter on the ESA website and more information. And in the roadmap, it tells you exactly how to coordinate a group, like who speaks first and how you do this and that. So the roadmap is actually valuable if you're the virtual roadmap, even if you're going to go meet in person. So yeah. And I just do want to say too that it's so important. I'm going to tell you one thing, a couple of things never ever to do if you want to have any impact or be heard at all. There's no such thing as quid pro quo on the Hill. You would never pick up the phone and say, I voted for XYZ, and so he needs to do this. Don't do that. Don't ever talk about that. Weirdly enough, don't talk about politics. It's very strange, but when you're walking around in those congressional offices, people don't talk politics. They talk about issues. Their bosses, the members of Congress, may be talking politics on the floor, but you don't do that. You know, you can respectfully say that you don't agree with those policies and you're concerned about those policies, but don't beat up on anyone. Just so they hear you. Just say, I'm concerned about X policy that's going on right now. And then you tell them what policy, why you're concerned, and what you would like to happen. Okay, because you want to be heard. If you go up and you know just and you if you go up and you just don't treat them professionally and with the respect of the office, even if you don't agree with their policies, uh, they're gonna hang up on you, first of all. They don't have to stand there, listen to that, but also that you're just not gonna be heard and your impact is gonna be zero. So you got that. Okay. Okay, so here's an example of a meeting with the lawmaker, and I'll let Maida go ahead and play that.
Meeting with your local representative soon? Here's how to run an effective meeting with a lawmaker. There are some important things to consider preparing for your meeting. Prior to your appointment, meet with everyone involved and create a plan of action. This plan of action includes identify who in the group should be the lead speaker. Usually it is the constituent of the lawmaker. Structure and outline your argument or your ask. Assign different members of your group different points to communicate. And decide if there are any materials you would like to leave with the lawmaker. Once the day of the big meeting arrives, here are a few things you should do. Be sure that everyone arrives at least 15 minutes early, dresses professionally, and brings business cards to distribute to the lawmaker and their staff. Everyone should begin by introducing themselves, providing their name, title, and organization affiliation. Thank your legislator or their staff for prior work or public service they have conducted in your state, city, or district. Even if you are meeting with a lawmaker you disagree with, be courteous and begin the meeting by thanking them for anything they have accomplished, no matter how small. Next, tell your lawmaker why you are there and clearly explain what it is you wish them to do about your issue. For example, you might ask that they fund science research in a sustained and predictable manner. Be prepared with specific examples of how supporting your issue has helped the local community, or how being against the issue has hurt or will hurt the community. After stating your position, listen to the opinion of the lawmaker and take notes on what they or members of their staff say in response. If you are asked a question but don't know the answer, say that you will follow up with additional information. Thank your legislators for his or her time and offer yourself as a resource for anything they may need in the future. Here's what you do after your meeting. If you offer to follow up and provide information during the meeting, be sure to do so. Send the office a thank you note saying you appreciated their time. If you would like more information or would like to be more involved in public policy issues that affect science and innovation, please join the Act for Chemistry Network at acs.org/actforchemistry.
And of course, we want you to act for ecology. You can act for chemistry too, but we really want you to act for ecology. And we work ACS, American Chemical Society. It's the largest society in the world. Actually, it's bigger than AAAS, I think. But they have some really great resources, and they're one of our sister societies that we work with quite frequently. So thank you to them. So next slide. Okay, and so after the meeting, you want to send a thank you email to your member of Congress. If you're going up to talk, say if you're a wildland fire expert and and that's something where issue that's of course relevant, especially for California lawmakers. But you wanted to go up and there's a piece of wildland fire legislation and you wanted to talk to the member of Congress about it and talk about the science and the legislation, that's when you could become a subject matter expert for that member of Congress, and that's relationship building. And we have actually had ESA members who meet with or check in with their senators, several times a year as a subject matter expert and just say, hey, just calling to check in and, let you know, here's some new information I have. And so what happens, because things work really quickly on the Hill, is that if a piece of legislation comes up, they're more likely to look in their Rolodex, or in their contact list, and that ecologist who's been checking in with them throughout the year, they'll just it's just human nature. They're going to reach out to you. So that's an important thing to do too. Okay, next slide. Okay, again, Maida and I are keeping a page called Policy News Headlines that hopefully will help keep you updated on what's going on with science policy right now during this volatile time. Join one of the sections, sign up for the rapid response team, contact Maida and I. We're more than happy to help you, put together or coordinate a meeting on the Hill, whether it's virtual, in person, or whatever. Just, email us. We have our toolkit on the website. Apply for the Graduate Student Policy Award, and ESA is we're really trying to significantly step up the tools that we offer members in order to engage in policy. And so we will be doing more webinars throughout the year, and we're going to do our very best to try and keep you informed. So next slide. Okay. Here are some other resources. I'll just and there's especially one I want to talk about: engineers and scientists acting locally. That is a group that trains scientists to work at the local level, which can be hugely impactful. Ton of websites, namely Compass is a really good one that talk about science communication. And then the Science and Technology Policy Academy is a really good one. There's a woman named Deborah Stein who that's her academy, and she's very active on LinkedIn, and she's very active in terms of talking about what's going on every day in the science policy world. She's very good. And I think that's an underutilized resource not many people know about, which is why I'm taking a minute to talk about it. Next slide. Okay, well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you participating in this webinar. Again, the presentation will be emailed to you. The recording will be available for you to see. And the virtual roadmap will be posted on our website along with the fact sheets. And thank you again so much for participating in this important activity. And I hope it's given you just enough confidence in meeting with your member of Congress that you will do so. I will tell you that ESA will be sending out an action alert asking our members to contact their member of Congress within the week. At least that's the plan today. Things change daily, but that's the plan. Unless something changes, then we'll have a new plan. But we are going to ask you to contact your member of Congress. So thank you again. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Maida and myself. We just personally enjoy talking to members and interacting with you. That's kind of the best part of our jobs. And we hope that you will join us for the hour-long part 2 of this webinar, where we're going to actually help you with your messaging, and you'll be able to, that will be a very participatory activity, unlike the webinar, which has basically been just a webinar. So thank you again. You're important. We care about you, and stick close to your society right now. We all need to support each other and support science. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.